December 21, 1944. Dawn. Malmedy, Belgium. Private Francis Sherman Currey was 19 years old and freezing. He'd been awake for 36 hours straight, huddled in a makeshift defensive position near a ruined factory outside Malmedy, watching the fog roll across frozen fields. The temperature was below zero. His fingers were numb inside his gloves, and through the mist he could hear something that made every soldier in the Ardennes terrified: the distinctive rumble of Panzer tank engines. The Battle of the Bulge. Hitler's last desperate gamble to split the Allied armies and recapture. The vital port of Antwerp was 5 days old and going catastrophically for American forces. On December 16, 1944, German forces had launched a massive surprise offensive through the Ardennes forest, attacking along an 80-mile front with 30 divisions, over 200,000 soldiers, 1,000 tanks, and 2,000 artillery pieces. The American units caught in the initial assault were shattered. The 106th Infantry Division, newly arrived in Europe and holding what was supposed to be a quiet sector, lost 2 entire regiments, over 8,000 men, in the opening days. Bastogne was surrounded. Roads that Allied planners had assumed were secure were suddenly contested. Fuel depots, ammunition dumps, headquarters units, all found themselves in or near combat zones. The weather was terrible. Freezing temperatures, snow and fog that grounded Allied aircraft and made reconnaissance nearly impossible. German infiltrators wearing American uniforms and speaking English were creating chaos behind Allied lines. Communications broke down. Units lost contact with higher headquarters. The fog of war wasn't a metaphor. It was literal. Fog combined with German deception and the confusion of a front, collapsing faster than anyone could track. The 30th Infantry Division found itself in the northern shoulder of the German breakthrough, part of the desperate effort to contain the penetration and prevent German forces from reaching the Meuse River and beyond. Their sector included Malmedy, a road junction town whose capture would open routes deeper into Belgium. German commanders knew they had to take Malmedy to sustain their advance. American commanders knew they had to hold it to anchor the defensive line. This was the strategic context when Francis Currey's platoon from K Company, 120th Infantry Regiment, took up defensive positions near a ruined factory outside Malmedy. German forces had smashed through American lines, creating a massive bulge in the Allied front. Entire divisions were surrounded. Supply lines were cut, and small groups of American soldiers like Currey's platoon found themselves in the path of the German advance with orders that were simple and terrifying. Hold the line. Francis Currey had never planned to be a hero. His early life hadn't suggested this was where he'd end up. Born June 29, 1925, in Loch Sheldrake, New York, his childhood was marked by tragedy when both parents died before he reached his teenage years. Orphaned at 12, he was raised by foster parents who gave him stability, but couldn't erase the loss that had defined his early years. By his 18th birthday in 1943, the war had been raging for years. Young men across America were enlisting, being drafted, shipping out to Europe and the Pacific. Currey could have waited to be drafted, could have tried for deferments or exemptions. Instead, he enlisted voluntarily on the day he turned 18. Not for glory or adventure, but because it seemed like the right thing to do. America was at war. Young men were needed. He'd go. 6 months of training followed. Basic combat skills, unit tactics, how to function as part of the infantry machine that would eventually storm Europe. Then the transport ship to England. The grinding tension of waiting while Allied forces prepared for what would become the breakout from Normandy. Finally, assignment to K Company, 120th Infantry Regiment, a 30th Infantry Division, the Old Hickory Division, named after Andrew Jackson and composed primarily of National Guard units from the Carolinas, Georgia, and Tennessee. The 30th Infantry Division had a reputation. They'd landed in Normandy on June 10, 1944, just days after D-Day. They'd fought through the hedgerows of France where every field became a deadly maze of cover and concealment favoring German defenders. They'd participated in the breakout that finally shattered German defenses and allowed Allied forces to sweep across France. By December 1944, they were seasoned combat veterans who'd been fighting continuously for 6 months. Francis Currey, at 19, was one of the newer replacements in a unit of hardened survivors. He'd seen combat, but nothing like what was about to hit the Ardennes. And now, at 19, he was about to do something that would earn him the Medal of Honor and save 5 men's lives, if he survived the next 3 hours. Through the fog, shapes were emerging. Panzer IV tanks, their long 75mm guns traversing slowly as they searched for targets. Behind them, German infantry in winter camouflage moving in squad formations. This wasn't a probe or a reconnaissance. This was a full assault aimed at breaking through to the bridges beyond Malmedy that would open the route to Liège, and eventually, Antwerp. Currey's position was supposed to be supported by anti-tank guns and artillery. But the chaos of the German breakthrough had scattered American forces. The anti-tank guns had been overrun or withdrawn. Artillery support was unreliable. Shells were landing miles off target because German infiltrators had captured or killed forward observers. Currey and his platoon were effectively alone, defending a strongpoint that German intelligence probably didn't even know existed. And then Currey saw it. Abandoned in a ditch about 30 yards from his position was an M1 Bazooka. The soldier who'd been carrying it was dead, killed in the fighting the previous day. Next to the body were 6 rockets. 6 chances to stop German armor that outweighed and outgunned anything Currey had. The math was simple and terrible. A Panzer IV weighed about 25 tons and had armor up to 80 millimeters thick on the front. The M1 Bazooka rocket could penetrate maybe 100 millimeters of armor at close range, but only if you hit at the right angle, on the side or rear where armor was thinner. A frontal shot would probably bounce off. And close range for a bazooka meant getting within 30 to 50 yards of a tank that could kill you from 500 yards away with a single high-explosive shell. Currey made his decision. He crawled out of his position, dragged the bazooka and rockets back, loaded one rocket with hands shaking from both cold and adrenaline, and waited for the Panzers to get closer. If this story of a 19-year-old orphan facing down German tanks with a bazooka is already gripping you, hit that subscribe button right now because this is a true Medal of Honor story that most people have never heard. Drop a comment on whether you'd have had the courage to do what Currey did. And keep watching because what happens next is absolutely incredible. The lead Panzer was now 40 yards away. Close enough. Currey shouldered the bazooka, aimed at the tank's side, where the armor was thinner, and fired. The rocket streaked across the frozen field, trailing white smoke. For a fraction of a second, Currey thought he'd missed. Then the rocket impacted just below the tank's turret ring with a flash and a crack that echoed across the battlefield. The Panzer lurched to a stop. Smoke began pouring from its engine compartment. The crew bailed out, running for cover as ammunition inside the tank started cooking off. 1 down. 5 rockets left. And the other German tanks had seen the smoke trail and were turning their turrets toward Currey's position. This is the moment when most soldiers would have retreated. Mission accomplished. You've disabled 1 tank, proven that the position is defended, slowed the German advance. Fall back to secondary positions before the return fire kills you. It's what Currey's training had taught him. Complete the mission, preserve your life, fight another day. But Currey could see something that changed his calculation. To his right, about 100 yards away in the ruined factory building, 5 American soldiers from his company were pinned down. They'd been hit during the initial German assault and couldn't withdraw. German infantry had them surrounded. If Currey retreated now, those 5 men would be captured or killed, and the German armor would roll right over their position. So Currey stayed, loaded another rocket, picked his next target, a Panzer that had swung around to flank his position, waited until it presented its side armor, fired. This shot was even better than the first. The rocket hit the tank's fuel tank and the Panzer erupted in flames. The crew never made it out. The burning hulk blocked the advance route for the tanks behind it, forcing them to maneuver around the wreckage. Every second of delay gave American forces time to organize a defense, time to call in reinforcements, Time to save those 5 trapped soldiers. But now, every German gun in the sector was looking for the Bazooka team that had just knocked out 2 Panzers. Machine gun fire raked Currey's position. German infantry was advancing directly toward him. Artillery shells, German 88s that could pulverize a building, started landing nearby. The ground shook. Shrapnel whined through the air. Currey pressed himself into the frozen earth and tried to become invisible. This level of courage from a teenager is almost incomprehensible. If you're appreciating this true story of American heroism, hit that like button right now. Make sure you're subscribed because the rest of this battle gets even more intense. And comment below on what you would have done in Currey's position. Retreat to save yourself or stay to save your brothers. The German infantry was now within 50 yards, too close for effective bazooka use. These rockets needed some distance to arm properly. Too close for Currey to reload without being spotted and shot. He had to switch weapons. Currey grabbed his Browning automatic rifle, the Bar, a 20-round magazine-fed automatic rifle that was the platoon's primary suppression weapon. It weighed 20 pounds, fired .30 .06 ammunition at 500 rounds per minute, and was devastating at close range. But it also kicked like a mule and burned through ammunition so fast that gunners carried extra magazines on every part of their uniform that would hold one. He opened fire on the advancing German infantry. The Bar's distinctive rapid-fire bark echoed across the battlefield. German soldiers dove for cover. The advance stalled. But Currey knew this was temporary. He had maybe 4 magazines total, 80 rounds. Once those were gone, the Germans would rush his position and it would be over, and then Currey saw his next option. About 40 yards to his left, there was an abandoned 50 caliber Browning M2 machine gun. The Mod Deuce, the heavy machine gun that could chew through buildings, stop trucks, and even damage lightly armored vehicles. It had been part of a defensive emplacement that was overrun the previous day. The crew was dead, but the gun appeared intact. The problem was getting to it. 40 yards of open ground under fire from German infantry, machine guns, and tank cannons. Running that distance in winter gear through snow while carrying weapons would take maybe 15 seconds. 15 seconds of being a target for every German soldier who saw him move. Francis Currey, 19 years old, orphaned at 12, 6 months out of training, made the decision that would define the rest of his life. He ran. German machine gun fire followed him across the frozen field. Bullets kicked up snow around his boots. He heard rounds snap past his head close enough to feel the shock wave. 30 yards. 20 yards. His legs were burning, lungs screaming for air in the freezing cold. 10 yards. A bullet hit something on his uniform. Canteen, maybe, or magazine pouch, with an impact he felt but didn't process. 5 yards. He dove behind the 50 cal emplacement and immediately checked the weapon. The ammunition belt was still loaded. The action cycled when he pulled the charging handle. The previous crew had left it ready to fire. Currey swung the gun toward the German infantry advance and pressed the trigger. The 50 caliber Browning M2 is one of the most intimidating weapons ever created. Each round is roughly the size of a human finger. The gun fires them at 450-600 rounds per minute. The muzzle energy is so high that the rounds can penetrate brick walls, punch through engine blocks, and turn human targets into pink mist. The sound of a 50 cal firing is so distinctive that soldiers who've heard it once never forget it. A deep, hammering roar that drowns out everything else on a battlefield. Currey fired burst after burst into the German infantry. Soldiers who'd been advancing confidently behind their armor suddenly found themselves under fire from a weapon that could kill them through their cover. The German advance stopped. Infantry went to ground. Officers started redirecting forces to deal with this unexpectedly fierce resistance. Currey just ran 40 yards under fire to reach a machine gun that would let him hold off an entire German assault. If this true story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, make sure you're subscribed and hit that like button. Share this video because Francis Currey's heroism deserves to be known. And drop a comment on whether you think one soldier can really change the outcome of a battle, because Currey proved it's possible. But Currey wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. While he'd been suppressing the German infantry with the 50 cal, the 5 American soldiers trapped in the factory had seen an opportunity. With German attention focused on Currey's position, they could try to withdraw. One by one, the 5 soldiers, all wounded, 2 seriously, began moving from the factory toward American lines. They were exposed, moving slowly because of their injuries, completely dependent on Currey keeping German forces pinned down long enough for them to reach safety. Currey saw them moving and understood immediately what was at stake. If he stopped firing, if he let German infantry advance, those 5 men would be killed. So he kept firing, burst after burst. The 50 cal's barrel was beginning to glow red from the sustained fire. The ammunition belt was getting shorter. His shoulder was bruised from the weapon's recoil transmitted through the gun's spade grips. His ears were ringing despite the cold air that should have dissipated the sound. German return fire was intensifying. Tank rounds were landing closer. Not direct hits yet, but close enough that shrapnel was hitting the emplacement. Machine gun fire from multiple German positions was converging on Currey's 50 cal. It was only a matter of time before a German tank got a direct bead on him and ended this with one high-explosive shell. But the 5 wounded soldiers were moving, 50 yards from the factory, 75 yards. One man fell and another came back to help him. Currey fired another burst to cover them. The 50 cal's barrel was now visibly glowing even in daylight. 100 yards. They were almost to American lines, and then Currey's ammunition ran out. The belt fed its last round through the gun, the action locked back, and suddenly the battlefield was quieter, still filled with the sounds of combat, but without the overwhelming roar of the 50 cal dominating the audio landscape. German infantry immediately recognized that the suppressing fire had stopped. They began advancing again. Currey looked at the 5 retreating soldiers. They were 150 yards away now, almost safe, but not quite in friendly lines. If the Germans rushed forward in the next 30 seconds, they might still catch them. Currey grabbed his bar again, loaded his last magazine, and opened fire. 20 rounds to buy 30 more seconds. He fired in short bursts, making every round count, walking his fire across the advancing German line. And then the bar's bolt locked back on an empty chamber, too. No bazooka rockets left, no 50 cal ammunition, no bar magazines. Francis Currey was out of everything except his service rifle, an M1 Garand with 8 rounds in the clip. Against multiple Panzer tanks, dozens of German infantry, and machine gun positions that now had him pinpointed. But the 5 soldiers had made it. They'd reached American lines, aided by medics, pulled into cover. Alive because a 19-year-old orphan from New York had decided their lives were worth more than his own safety. And comment your thoughts. Is this the greatest example of courage you've ever heard? Keep watching, because the ending will surprise you. Now, Currey faced his final calculation. Stay in position with no ammunition and almost certainly die. Or retreat, not to save himself, but because he'd accomplished the mission. The 5 soldiers were safe. He'd delayed the German advance long enough for American artillery to start coordinating effective fire. He'd destroyed or disabled multiple tanks and killed dozens of German infantry. He'd done more than any single soldier could reasonably be expected to do. So Currey began withdrawing. Not running, that would draw attention and fire, but moving carefully from cover to cover, using the smoke and chaos of the battle to mask his movement, heading back toward American lines. German infantry saw him and opened fire. Rounds snapped past. One grazed his uniform. Second time that morning he'd been nearly killed by a bullet that missed by inches. He dove behind a wrecked vehicle, waited for a break in the fire, moved again. 20 yards closer to safety. German machine gunners tracked his movement, tracers forming deadly arcs through the air. Currey zigged, dropped, rolled behind another piece of cover, 10 yards from American lines, and then friendly hands were pulling him into a foxhole. American voices shouting, "Medic!" even though Currey wasn't seriously wounded. Officers demanding to know what had happened, how one soldier had held off an entire German assault for, they checked their watches, compared notes, over 3 hours. 3 hours. From the moment Curry grabbed that abandoned bazooka until he'd withdrawn with no ammunition, 3 hours had passed. 3 hours of continuous combat against tanks and infantry. 3 hours that gave American forces time to establish defensive lines, call in artillery, organize a coherent response to the German breakthrough. 3 hours that saved 5 lives, directly and probably hundreds more indirectly by delaying the German advance at a critical moment. But Curry didn't know any of this yet. He was 19, exhausted, freezing, his hands shaking from adrenaline dump, his ears ringing from sustained fire. He slumped in the foxhole, and someone handed him a canteen of water that tasted like the best thing he'd ever drunk. And then someone said the words that would change his life. "You're probably getting a medal for this, kid." Curry didn't believe it. He'd just done what needed to be done. What any soldier in his position would have done. Nothing special. Just his job. He was wrong about that. What Francis Sherman Currey had done on December 21st, 1944, near Malmedy, Belgium, was extraordinary by any measure. And 7 months later, he would stand in front of Major General Leland Hobbs in France and receive the Medal of Honor, America's highest award for valor in combat. But before we get to that ceremony, to Curry's post-war life, to the legacy of this incredible act of heroism, let's understand what happened from the German perspective. Because the story of Francis Curry's stand isn't complete without understanding how it looked from the other side, and why a 19-year-old with a bazooka was able to achieve what he achieved. The German after-action reports from December 21st, 1944, tell a story that American forces only discovered years later when archives were opened. The attacking force that hit Curry's position wasn't a small probe. It was a reinforced Panzer company supported by 2 companies of infantry, approximately 300 soldiers total with at least 6 tanks. Their objective was clear: break through the Malmedy defense line, secure the bridges, and open the route to Liège. German intelligence had identified this sector as weakly defended. Most American anti-tank assets had been withdrawn or destroyed in previous fighting. The attack should have succeeded quickly, allowing German forces to exploit the breakthrough before American reserves could respond. But German commanders encountered something they hadn't anticipated: unexpectedly fierce resistance from a strongpoint near a ruined factory. The German report noted heavy anti-tank fire from entrenched position that destroyed 2 Panzers and forced the attacking force to deploy for a deliberate assault. This deployment, spreading out infantry, bringing up supporting weapons, coordinating tank and infantry movement, took time. Critical time that allowed American forces to reinforce the defense line. What's remarkable is that German intelligence never correctly identified what they were fighting. They assumed they'd encountered a dug-in anti-tank platoon with multiple bazooka teams and heavy machine gun support. The idea that a single soldier with abandoned weapons had held them off for 3 hours wasn't considered. It was too improbable to believe. The German attack commander wrote in his report that the resistance was fierce and well-coordinated, suggesting multiple defensive positions working together. He recommended future attacks in this sector include additional tank support and artillery preparation, all because of one 19-year-old who'd made a series of desperate decisions that happened to look like a coordinated defensive plan. This misidentification had strategic consequences. German planners, believing the Malmedy sector was more heavily defended than it actually was, diverted forces to other breakthrough attempts. Resources that might have exploited weaknesses elsewhere were instead committed to what they thought was a heavily fortified position. Francis Curry's stand didn't just save 5 lives, it influenced German operational planning for days afterward. But Curry didn't know any of this on December 23rd, 1944. He spent the next few days fighting with his unit as the Battle of the Bulge continued. The German offensive wouldn't be fully contained until late January 1945. K Company, 120th Infantry Regiment, continued fighting through Belgium and eventually into Germany itself. Curry participated in additional actions, though none matched the intensity of his December 21st stand. the German commanders never realized they'd been stopped by one soldier. If this fascinating perspective is adding depth to the story, hit that like button and share this video. Subscribe for more true stories that reveal unexpected details. And comment on whether you think Currey's actions really influenced the battle's outcome, because the evidence says they absolutely did. What happened next took months and involved a verification process that was more rigorous than most people realize. The Medal of Honor isn't awarded on a commander's recommendation alone. It requires multiple witness statements, verification of the tactical situation, evaluation of whether the actions truly went above and beyond the call of duty, and approval at multiple levels of command. Someone in K Company's chain of command, probably Currey's platoon leader or company commander, filed the initial commendation for Currey's actions. This detailed report described what had happened: the bazooka attacks against the German tanks, the sustained machine gun fire, the cover provided for the 5 wounded soldiers' withdrawal. But initial battlefield reports are often incomplete or exaggerated, so the Army investigates thoroughly. Multiple witnesses provided sworn statements describing what they'd seen from their positions. The 5 soldiers whose lives Currey had saved gave detailed accounts of how his fire had suppressed German forces long enough for them to reach safety. Other members of K Company described seeing the German tanks disabled, hearing the sustained fire from the .50 caliber position, watching Currey's impossible run across open ground under fire. Battalion staff officers reconstructed the tactical situation using maps, unit positions, and German after-action reports captured later. They verified that the German force Currey engaged was indeed the size and composition described, not exaggerated or misidentified. They confirmed that the defensive position had been isolated without the anti-tank or artillery support that would have been standard. They documented that the delay imposed on the German advance had measurable strategic effects. The commendation went up through battalion, regiment, and division levels, each commander adding their endorsement. At division level, Major General Leland Hobbs, a combat veteran himself who understood exactly what Currey had faced, approved forwarding the recommendation to higher headquarters. From there it went to Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, where final decisions about Medal of Honor awards were made. By spring 1945, as Allied forces were pushing into Germany and the war in Europe was clearly ending, the full investigation was complete. The verification was thorough. The witnesses were credible. The tactical situation was confirmed. The actions met the extraordinarily high standard for America's highest military decoration: conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. Francis Currey's actions on December 21, 1944, met that standard beyond any doubt. Multiple lives saved, enemy advance delayed, actions taken voluntarily, without orders, in a situation where retreat would have been justified and understandable. Risk to his own life so extreme that survival was itself remarkable. This was precisely what the Medal of Honor was designed to recognize. On July 27, 1945, 2 months after Germany's surrender, while American forces were still occupying Europe, Major General Leland Hobbs, commander of the 30th Infantry Division, presented Private First Class Francis Sherman Currey with the Medal of Honor in a ceremony in France. The official citation, recorded as General Orders No. 41, August 17, 1945, reads in part, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at risk of life above and beyond the call of duty, Private Currey, acting on his own initiative, seized an abandoned bazooka and rockets, ran 50 yards through heavy fire to an advantageous position, and destroyed an enemy tank. Moving to another position, he destroyed a second tank. Then, manning an abandoned machine gun, he covered the withdrawal of 5 wounded comrades." The ceremony wasn't elaborate by modern standards. The war was over, soldiers wanted to go home, and the military was beginning the massive demobilization that would return millions of Americans to civilian life. But the men of the 30th Infantry Division, the old Hickory Division that had fought from Normandy through the Bulge and into Germany, understood what the medal represented. They'd seen combat. They knew what it took to do what Currey had done, and when Major General Hobbs pinned the Medal of Honor on Currey's uniform, the assembled soldiers understood they were witnessing recognition of something genuinely extraordinary. Currey was 20 years old. He'd enlisted at 18, gone to war at 19, and received the Medal of Honor at 20. He was one of the youngest WWII Medal of Honor recipients, and unlike many recipients who received the award posthumously, Currey had survived, which meant he'd spend the rest of his life carrying the weight of that honor. This ceremony marked the end of Currey's wartime service but the beginning of his legacy. If you're moved by this true story of valor recognized, make sure you're subscribed. Hit that like button and share with anyone who appreciates American military history. Comment on whether you think the Medal of Honor adequately recognizes this level of sacrifice, and keep watching because Currey's post-war life is equally inspiring in a different way. Francis Currey returned to the United States in late 1945 and faced the challenge that millions of veterans faced, transitioning from military service to civilian life. He'd left home at 18. He'd experienced combat that most people couldn't imagine. He carried the Medal of Honor, an honor that opened doors but also came with expectations and attention he didn't particularly want. Many WWII veterans struggled with this transition. The war had defined their late teens and early 20s. They'd developed skills that had no civilian application. They'd formed bonds with fellow soldiers that were impossible to replicate in civilian friendships. They'd faced death, seen terrible things, done extraordinary things, and then were expected to just go back to normal life as if nothing had changed. Currey found his path forward through the Veterans Administration. In the late 1940s, the VA was overwhelmed. Over 16 million Americans had served in WWII. Millions needed medical care, education benefits under the GI Bill, disability compensation, home loans, and other services. The VA was struggling to meet this demand with limited resources and staff. Currey joined the VA in the late 1940s and began a career that would span over 30 years. He worked primarily out of the VA office in Albany, New York, helping other veterans navigate the complex bureaucracy of benefits and services. His role wasn't glamorous, no dramatic rescues or heroic stands, just day after day of helping fellow veterans get the assistance they'd earned through their service. But there's a profound similarity between what Currey did in Belgium in 1944 and what he did for the VA for 3 decades afterward. In both cases, he saw people who needed help and decided their welfare was more important than his convenience. In 1944, that meant risking his life to save 5 wounded soldiers. In the decades afterward, it meant spending his career helping thousands of veterans access the benefits and care they deserved. The veterans Currey helped probably didn't always recognize him. The Medal of Honor wasn't something he advertised. He didn't want special treatment or attention. He just wanted to do his job, helping his fellow veterans, one case at a time, one benefit claim at a time, one confused veteran trying to navigate VA paperwork at a time. There's something profoundly American about this. The man who'd performed one of the most heroic acts of WWII spent his post-war life in quiet service, not seeking glory or recognition, just trying to help others. It speaks to a character that values duty over attention, service over celebrity. Currey's 30-year VA career is as inspiring as his Medal of Honor action, just in a quieter way. If this aspect of his story resonates with you, hit that like button right now. Subscribe for more stories about true American heroes who serve both in war and peace. Share this video because Currey's complete story, both combat and post-war, deserves to be widely known. Comment on what you think defines a hero, the dramatic moment or the decades of quiet service afterward. Currey's post-war life was largely private until 2009, when his hometown decided to honor him in a way that would ensure his legacy endured. The United States Postal Service, working with New York congressional representatives, renamed the post office in Hurleyville, New York, near Loch Sheldrake where Currey had grown up, as the Francis S. Currey Post Office. This might not seem like a major honor compared to the Medal of Honor itself, but there's significance in how communities choose to remember their heroes. A post office is a place ordinary citizens visit regularly. It's woven into the fabric of daily life. By naming it for Currey, Hurleyville ensured that generations of residents would encounter his name and potentially learn his story. In 2009, when the post office was renamed, Currey was 84 years old. He attended the dedication ceremony, characteristically humble about the honor. Local news coverage shows an elderly man who seems slightly embarrassed by the attention, deflecting praise by pointing out that many veterans had done extraordinary things, and he just happened to have his actions recognized. This humility was consistent throughout Currey's life. In interviews, which he gave rarely and reluctantly, he repeatedly emphasized that he'd just done his job, that the real heroes were the ones who didn't come home, that the Medal of Honor represented the sacrifice of his entire unit, not just his individual actions, but the people who knew what he'd done understood better. The 5 soldiers whose lives he'd saved in Belgium certainly understood. The hundreds of veterans he'd helped during his VA career understood. The citizens of Hurleyville who'd watched one of their own grow up orphaned, enlist at 18, and become a genuine American hero understood. In addition to the post office, a statue was erected in nearby Parksville, New York, commemorating Currey and other local Medal of Honor recipients. These physical memorials serve a purpose beyond honoring individuals. They keep history alive for younger generations who might otherwise never encounter these stories. Because here's what's important about Francis Currey's story. It's true, not embellished, not fictionalized, not a composite of multiple people or events. A real 19-year-old from upstate New York really did grab an abandoned bazooka on December 21, 1944, really did destroy German tanks, really did cover the withdrawal of 5 wounded soldiers, really did hold off a German assault for 3 hours, really did receive the Medal of Honor, and really did spend 30 years helping other veterans. Currey's hometown honors remind us that heroes come from ordinary places and return to those places to live quietly. If you're from a small town like Hurleyville and this story resonates with you, drop a comment about your hometown heroes. Subscribe for more true stories about ordinary Americans doing extraordinary things. Hit that like button and share this video to honor Currey's memory. Francis Sherman Currey died on October 8, 2019. At the age of 94, he'd lived nearly 75 years after the day that defined his public legacy, 3/4 of a century of life after that December morning in Belgium. He married, raised a family, built a career, retired, and enjoyed his grandchildren. All the ordinary joys of life that his actions in 1944 had enabled him and others to experience. His death was noted in military history circles and by Medal of Honor organizations. The New York National Guard assisted in providing final honors, a recognition of his service and his status as one of New York's most decorated veterans. Local news outlets ran obituaries highlighting his Medal of Honor action and his VA career. Veterans organizations published tributes emphasizing how Currey represented the best of the greatest generation: courage in war, humility in peace, service to others throughout life. But for those 3 hours on December 21, 1944, Francis Currey would have been just another veteran. Honorable service, but not particularly notable in a war where 16 million Americans served. Instead, his actions that day ensured his name would be remembered, his story would be told, and his example would inspire future generations. There's a broader lesson here about how individual actions can have cascading effects far beyond what the individual realizes at the time. Currey thought he was just trying to save 5 soldiers. He couldn't know that delaying the German advance would influence enemy planning for days. He couldn't know that his story would inspire military training on initiative and individual courage. He couldn't know that decades later, people would still be studying his actions as an example of what's possible when one person refuses to accept that a situation is impossible. The 5 soldiers he saved went on to live their lives. They had families, careers, contributed to their communities. Their children and grandchildren exist because Francis Currey decided their lives were worth risking his own. That's not an abstract calculation, it's dozens of actual people whose existence traces back to one teenager's decision to fight rather than retreat, and every veteran Currey helped during his 30-year VA career, every benefit claim he processed, every confused veteran he guided through bureaucracy, every service-connected disability he helped get recognized, represents another life improved because of his service. Not as dramatic as the battlefield actions, but cumulatively perhaps even more impactful. Currey's death in 2019 closed the book on an extraordinary life, but his story continues inspiring new generations. If this complete picture of a true American hero, from orphan to Medal of Honor recipient to VA career to hometown honors to peaceful death at 94, has moved you, hit that subscribe button. Share this video widely because these true stories need to be told. And comment on what aspect of Currey's life inspires you most: the combat heroism, the post-war service, or the humble character that defined both. Why does Francis Currey's story matter today? Why should people in 2025 care about what a teenager did in Belgium in 1944? Several reasons, each important in its own way. First, it's a reminder that extraordinary heroism can come from ordinary people in unexpected circumstances. Currey wasn't a career soldier, wasn't from a military family, wasn't specially trained for elite forces. He was an orphaned kid from upstate New York who enlisted at 18, and 6 months later faced a situation that demanded more courage than most people will ever need in their entire lives. And he found that courage, which suggests that potential for heroism exists in more people than we might think. It just rarely gets tested. Second, it demonstrates how individual initiative can change outcomes even in large-scale conflicts. The Battle of the Bulge involved hundreds of thousands of soldiers fighting across a 100-mile front. One soldier's actions shouldn't matter in that scale. But Currey's stand delayed a German breakthrough at a critical moment, influenced enemy planning, and saved lives. Individual agency matters even in massive systems. Third, it shows that heroism isn't just about the dramatic moment. Currey's 3 hours of combat were extraordinary, but his 30 years of VA service represent a different kind of commitment. Sustained dedication to helping others even when no one's watching. No medals will be awarded, and the work is bureaucratic rather than glorious. Both types of service matter. Both deserve recognition. Fourth, it's simply a great story. True, verified, documented, not Hollywood fiction or composite characters. A real person really did this. The details are accurate. The outcome is verified. In an age where so much content is manufactured or exaggerated, there's value in stories that are genuinely true. Francis Sherman Currey really did grab that bazooka, really did destroy those tanks, really did save those soldiers, really did earn the Medal of Honor honestly. And finally, it's a story that needs to be preserved. Currey is gone. The soldiers he saved are gone. The German soldiers he fought are gone. We're approaching the point where no one who experienced WWII firsthand will remain alive. Stories like Currey's are our connection to that history. Not abstract data about divisions and battles, but human stories about individuals who faced impossible situations and did extraordinary things. This is why we make these videos, to preserve true stories that deserve to be remembered. If you value this kind of detailed, accurate historical content, subscribe right now and turn on notifications. Hit that like button if this story moved you. Share this video widely. Every share helps ensure Francis Currey's heroism isn't forgotten. And drop your final thoughts in the comments. What's your biggest takeaway from this true Medal of Honor story? Thank you for watching this deep dive into the life and heroism of Francis Sherman Currey. His actions on December 21, 1944, saved lives directly and influenced the Battle of the Bulge in ways that rippled through military planning and history. His post-war service helped thousands of veterans access the benefits they'd earned. His humble character throughout his life exemplifies the best of the greatest generation. Check out our other videos for more true Medal of Honor stories and deep dives into American military history. And remember, heroes often come from ordinary places, do extraordinary things when circumstances demand it, and then return to quiet lives of continued service. Francis Sherman Currey was exactly that kind of hero. His story is true, his courage was real, and his legacy deserves to be honored. See you in the next video,